Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a good weekend. And I was out last week teaching at a Bible college to both first and second year students. I want to thank Representative Louis Gohmert for sitting in this chair a couple of days, and for, of course, Penna Dexter. And we're back. And, of course, we have a presidential debate taking place on Wednesday. And the second hour, I want to spend a little more time talking about the presidential campaign. Donald Trump believes that we have a rigged election. I'm going to certainly get into that in some more detail. We're going to also continue on to talk about some of these issues of political correctness. Dr. Everett Piper is with us, but we'll also get back into the campaign. But one of the issues in the campaign, of course, is the issue of Islam, terrorism, jihad. And there is a new book out called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad. And we so many times have talked about some of these politically incorrect guides: the politically incorrect guide to American history, the politically incorrect guide to the Bible, the politically incorrect guide to capitalism and Constitution and Darwinism. And, of course, we've had Robert Spencer on talking about the politically incorrect guide to Islam and the Crusades. And the list goes on and on. And this is the newest book, which, again, we encourage you to look for in your local bookstore. It is published by Regnery. We also have information about it on our website. And the author of that book is William Kilpatrick. Many of us have read his articles over the years in a variety of places like First Things and Policy Review. Taught for many years at Boston College. I think I was first aware of him when I saw the book Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong. And, of course, his book Christianity, Islam, and Atheism, The Struggle for the Soul of the West is another book we would certainly commend to you. His articles appeared in some of the journals I just mentioned, as well as Investors Business Daily, Front Page Magazine, Jihad Watch, and many more. William Kilpatrick, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me on.
You know, I want to get into this idea of jihad, and maybe the first thing is to acknowledge that when we talk about Islam, there are a lot of people that believe Islam means peace, but it means submission. And until you understand that, you don't really get the concept of jihad correct. True?
No, and it's amazing that 15 years after 9/11, so many people still think that Islam means peace. And a lot of people don't know what jihad means. In many schools, it's taught that jihad means an interior spiritual struggle to better oneself, when in fact it simply means holy war against non-Muslims for the sake of Allah.
And again, sometimes people, I mean, I recognize some Muslims we've run into will say, you know, I'm encouraged or having a personal jihad. In other words, I'm trying to conform my will to the will of Islam and the will of Allah. But it does seem to me that we need to understand what that idea of jihad is. And early on in your book, you kind of make the distinctions between what most of us would define as jihad, and that is this idea of a struggle, an armed struggle. But there's also sort of, if you will, a secret kind of struggle, or what you call a quiet kind of jihad. Can you explain?
Yes, a lot of the book is about stealth jihad, and many Americans are not as well informed about stealth jihad as they are about the violent kind. And that's too bad, because the stealth jihadists have the same goals as the terrorists, except they work in more subtle ways. Actually, I mean, in a sense, the word stealth jihad is a little bit misleading, because these people have organizations, they have offices, they have PR people and legal teams, and actually they deal a lot with our government and our media. We consult with them a great deal. These are groups like CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, MAS, the Muslim American Society, and a couple of dozen other alphabet soup organizations.
So again, when we're talking about this, they may not say that, as a matter of fact, they might even condemn the terrorist actions of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, whoever it might be, Islamic Jihad, but their ultimate goal is the same, is it not?
Exactly. The ultimate goal is, it sounds kind of James Bondish, but the ultimate goal is world domination, submission of all other cultures and all of the governments to Islam. But as I say, they're stealthy about this. They don't say that that's their goal, and they work pretty much within the law. And then they cooperate a lot with the forces of political correctness. One of the other points that my book makes is that we're not just in a fight against jihadists, but also against their politically correct enablers in the media, in academia, and in the government. So what these jihadists really know how to take advantage of political correctness. They present themselves, they advertise themselves as civil rights organizations, and they say, in effect, that all we want is our rights, all we want is a part of the American dream, and that kind of thing. They know how to speak to the desire on the part of so many Americans to be open and tolerant and so forth.
Well, again, we'll get into some of the Western enablers of jihad in just a minute, but back to the point you made just a minute ago in terms of infiltrating. You have a section where you talk about who needs ISIS when the Council on American Islamic Relations is allowed to vet U.S. military training manuals. Someone who sat in this chair for me Monday and Tuesday of last week is Representative Louis Gohmert, and he and former Representative Representative Bachmann and others have pointed out that when you look at some of those training manuals, it does indeed seem like there's an influence that comes not only from CARE, but from the Muslim Brotherhood. And isn't it not true that we do have various people that are associated with the Muslim Brotherhood in government, and you have groups like CARE that are really evaluating the way in which we train those people in the military and the FBI?
Yeah, well, when the history of this era is written, I think we'll be amazed at the degree of penetration of our society by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the best example of that is the purge that of these military training manuals and FBI manuals that occurred in 2012 at the behest of many Muslim organizations such as CARE. They wrote a letter to John Brennan saying that the training then in effect was biased and offensive to Muslims, and the administration capitulated immediately and ordered this purge of all the training manuals. Thousands of pages of materials were just gotten rid of and replaced with politically correct forms of training, namely see no Islam, hear no Islam, and speak no Islam. In other words, the notion that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. And that may be the reason this purge that the FBI and other investigative agencies have missed so many clues so many times that would have led to terrorists before they did their dirty work.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation with William Kilpatrick. The book is entitled The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad, brought to you by the Religion of Peace, and it is published by Regnery, and you can find out more about that by going to our website, pointofview.net. Also, I have a link to turningpointproject.com and some other resources that you will find out about in terms of what is happening through William Kilpatrick. We'll continue this discussion of what jihad is and what that requires. How that relates to immigration, what about some of the Western enablers of jihad, and maybe a little bit of a case study, the clock boy. We'll talk more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
How How bad is the economy? Many people believe it is still in bad shape. Others don't see a problem. They point to a low unemployment rate, record corporate profits, and a booming stock market. The difference in perspective is explained in a recent column on why this feels like a depression for most people. It begins with this simple observation. Everyone has seen the pictures of the unemployed waiting in soup lines during the Great Depression. When you try to tell a propaganda-believing, willfully ignorant, mainstream media-watching, math-challenged consumer that we're in the midst of a greater depression, they act as if you've lost your mind. During the Great Depression, there were as many as 12 million Americans unemployed. These were the men pictured in the soup lines. Today, they are essentially invisible. There are 46 million Americans in an electronic soup line. That 46 million are on food stamps and are hidden from our view. Let's look at it another way. There are 251 million Americans of working age and about 149 are employed. That means that only 59% of Americans of working age actually work. This is a much lower percentage than it was during the Great Depression. The author concludes that for the average American family, the U.S. economy has been in recession since 2000, with the Greater Depression arriving in 2008. Although the working age population has grown by 40 million since 2000, only 12 million jobs were added during that time. Most of these new jobs are in the government-controlled health, education, and social services sectors. Millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs disappeared during that same period. That is why it feels like a depression for so many people. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm not ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. In theaters October 21st.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with William Kilpatrick as we talk about his book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And let's, if we can, for just a minute, maybe talk about what the goal is. So whether we're talking about an armed jihad or a stealth jihad, what is the ultimate goal? It's to establish a worldwide caliphate, isn't it? Guess we don't have William Kilpatrick. We'll see if we can get him back on the program. We're talking about the book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad. And again, it is published by Regnery, and we'll continue our conversation as soon as we can connect up with him. And we'll do our best to let you know about that. It is a good example, I think, of how political correctness is crippling our war against jihad. And as we're getting ready to choose the next commander-in-chief, it does seem to me that this would be very important for us to begin to think through some of these issues and to know exactly what we are up against. This upcoming debate on Wednesday won't necessarily focus on the commander-in-chief kinds of questions, but I suspect that those will come up. And to me, one of the great challenges we face in the 21st century is, of course, the challenge from jihad and the challenge from radical Muslims. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the program. And as I mentioned, just a little bit later in the second hour, we'll get into some of the challenges that have been coming to Donald Trump and his campaign, his charge that we are in the midst of a rigged campaign and other issues. So we'll spend some time getting into that topic as well. One of the things I thought was kind of intriguing is he talks about the clock boy. And you might remember this. It was the 14-year-old Muslim student who brought a self-made clock to the school, and it was to show his teachers. Then he was detained by the police, And the story that you first heard made it sound like everybody was overreacting. But interestingly enough, if you go back and look at the actual story, it was not as straightforward as you might have heard. Because interestingly enough, he actually took the innards of a Radio Shack clock and put them into a pencil box. Then he went to the first teacher, showed him what it was, and she said put it in the locker, but he did not do that, but instead decided to show it around and eventually found a teacher who reacted with the desired response. So then the police were called, and the Irving police showed up. They found the boy to be very uncooperative. And considering the fact that just a short time before that, you'd had two jihadists show up trying to kill people in the art exhibit not that far away in Garland, they felt that it might be appropriate to detain him. Of course, this led to all sorts of kinds of reactions. As William Kilpatrick points out, he says the case that the teen was deliberately trying to provoke a confrontation was strengthened as we learned more about his family. His older sister was once suspended from her school for threatening to blow it up. His uncle runs a trucking company called Twin Towers Transportation, and his father is kind of a publicity-hungry activist who calls himself a sheikh and wears flowing white robes and is a 9/11 truther. And William Kirkpatrick, I know you're now back with us. I think when we hear the story about the clock boy, we recognize that even though he began to be a celebrity and there were all sorts of offers for a scholarship and he got a chance to go to the White House and a number of other things, when we began to actually investigate that story, it illustrates again that he probably was trying to provoke the kind of response he received, as evidenced by the fact that now they've even brought a lawsuit. True?
Well, yes, and that's a common technique among the stealth jihadists, is to provoke some kind of situation, and then when the target responds to that situation in the expected way, you turn around and claim that they're Islamophobes, that they're intolerant, and you sue them, as he did. He and his family sued the town of Irving for $15 million. That's 15 million reasons for teachers and police to look the other way when they become suspicious of a Muslim.
You know, I was flying through an airport the other day, and I saw this thing where it was a video. Jay Johnson says, to see something, say something. And I thought how that it comes so easily off his mouth, off his tongue, as the Secretary of Homeland Security. But we are well aware of individuals that do see something, they do say something, and then they get vilified. And so when we look at, for example, the San Bernardino bombers, there were neighbors that said, something's not looking right. But far be it from me to go to the authorities and report this, because then I'll be labeled with this label of Islamophobia, and I'll probably be driven out of my job or driven out of the neighborhood. And so that's one of the concerns, right?
Exactly. That's what happened with Fort Hood. Major Nadal Hassan, his jihadist sympathies were well known to his colleagues for years before his attack. They thought of him as a ticking time bomb. Yet they failed to report him to their superiors for fear of being, they said this, for fear of being smeared as bigots and racists and Islamophobes. So yeah, I mean, if you see something, say something, but that only seems to apply to if you see a pressure cooker with wires sticking out of it, then say something. Otherwise, we're being taught to keep our mouths shut and look the other way. And that's the effect of this combination of stealth jihad and political correctness.
One other aspect, we talked about the military manuals, but one of the people that we've had on this program is Stephen Coughlin, and of course he wrote the book Catastrophic Failure, Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad, and he used to give what were called the red pill briefings, and we've had him on. We've also done some commentaries about that. The red pill, if you remember from the Matrix, you can get the red pill or the blue pill, but it was to really try to tell the story that you were trying to tell in this book. And for a while, people that actually were able to hear this or see the presentations were benefiting. But sooner or later, there came to be a purging that has taken place. And so today, a good example, again, of what you talk about in terms of how political correctness and anything that could be perceived as anti-Islamic is now removed from the kind of training that people in the military or people in the FBI or people in the Justice Department or people in Homeland Security might receive.
Yes, and Major Coughlin himself was fired from his position at the Pentagon because, actually, at the behest of a Muslim assistant named Hesham Islam, assistant to the deputy defense director. And the manuals are, once again, you're not supposed to make that connection, and you're not supposed to make any connection between terrorism and the religion of Islam. So they miss the rather obvious religious clues. For example, when a would-be terrorist goes over to Mecca, as in the case of the Orlando shooter, made 2 trips to Mecca, when they become more religious and more devout, as happened with him, as happened with the Boston Marathon bomber, as happened in numerous cases. But they're trained now not to look at those very obvious clues.
Talking with William Kilpatrick as we talk about his book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad. Let's, if we can, for a minute, talk about immigration and the refugee crisis. You point out in the beginning of the 20th century, there were 3 times as many Christians as Muslims in the world, but by the end of the 21st century, there would be more Muslims than Christians. And part of that has to do with a very significant fact of fertility. But you call it immigration and the baby jihad. In other words, if I immigrate into, let's take Europe for just a minute, and then because Muslims have many more children than, say, people in France or the UK or the Netherlands, over time, you end up turning the country into a Muslim country just simply due to the differential fertility rate, don't you?
Yes, it's called the War of the Wombs, actually, and Islam is winning and we're losing because the birth rate, for example, in Europe of native Europeans is very low. It's way below replacement, whereas birth rates for Muslims is very high. The most popular boy's name, or name for baby boys in England, is Mohammed. Mohammed is the most popular name for baby boys in Brussels and Rotterdam and numerous other cities in Europe. There are more Muslim than Christian children in Birmingham, England. There are more Muslim than Christian children in Vienna. So it's this combination of fertility rates on the one hand and immigration on the other. And actually, there is a doctrine of conquest, Islamic conquest through immigration. The Islamic calendar, for example, is not dated to 610 when Muhammad supposedly had his revelation. His first revelation, it's dated to 622 when he and his followers migrated from Mecca to Medina.
Yeah.
It wasn't until then that his religion really took off.
Sure. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. And I can see one of you had a problem with see something, say something, because when you say something, sometimes people don't take it seriously, so we'll take that and some of the other calls. And we'll also get into this section in the book on the Western enablers of jihad, because you might be saying, certainly in light of this threat, those people in positions of authority would take this seriously. Not necessarily. As a matter of fact, sometimes they tend to be the enablers. It's all part of the book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
From Pure Flakes comes I'm Not Ashamed. April 20th, 1999, the worst school shooting in U.S. history at Columbine High School. One victim was Rachel Joy Scott. Her life was taken, but her story lives on.
Jesus gave his life for me, and I'll give my life to him.
I'm Not Ashamed, rated PG-13, in theaters October 21st. More information at I'mNotAshamedFilm.com. Kerby recently wrote about the growing threat to our religious freedom. I hope you read that letter. There are few things more important. Many ministries say 2016 has been tough, very tough. I think a lot of us are down about the mess surrounding this election, but we dare not take our eyes off these issues, and Point of View will not. But we need your help. We really need your help right now to press on. Please visit pointofview.net, click the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151, or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Talking about the new book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad, and certainly this is an important issue in the campaign. It probably will show up even in the debate on Wednesday night. The current policy that we have is really one that has been constructed by the current president and the former Secretary of State, who's now running for president. If you think our current policy toward jihad and terrorism is effective, well, I guess you can make your decision in that regard. If you believe that it hasn't been as effective, then I think you may want to look for a change. And so in just a minute, we're going to talk about some of the Western enablers of jihad. That is chapter 7 in the book. But before we do so, we talked about see something, say something, and love to get some thoughts on that. So let's, if we can, go to Helen, listen on the Good News Network in Georgia. Helen, thank you for joining us today. Tell us your story.
Thank you so much, Kerby, for taking my call. But we recently moved to a new city in Georgia. And when we moved in, we saw an outdated tag on a car in the handicap space behind our townhomes. And didn't think much of it, but my husband ran a Carfax on it. He's in the car business, and it turned out to belong to some Muslims who live a few doors down. Well, they drive a car that's out of state. Their tag has been outdated, and it's been driven on for 2 years. That's how long they've lived here, according to our new neighbors. And I'm not Islamophobic. I've just read a wonderful book and plan to read the one today that I'm hearing about. But I read Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, and understand a lot more about jihad from reading that.
Yes, in fact, we've had him on the program talking about that, but go ahead.
Yes, he's a wonderful, wonderful testimony. But anyway, so I called the police because for them to be with 2 cars here and outdated tags and so forth, I thought that's not so bad, but I think I'll just report it. And I was told, well, that's okay. People can drive on outdated tags if they want to. The car might be from another state that belongs to a relative, so forth, so on. And then there was a grill put out behind their townhome, and a few days later, a second grill just butted up to it, and a few days later, a third grill, and one had a huge dome and another had a dome, and I thought, well, that's not unusual to have a grill, but that's kind of unusual that they keep adding grills and they're just right up next to each other. So my husband and I talked about it. Well, one day a big explosion came from I don't know where, but it put smoke all around the building, and it was not down at the street, it was up at the building. So I started connecting the dots and thought, well, that smoke could be coming out of that townhome where the grills are, because that's exactly where it was, the thickest.
Yeah, and again, it could have been just anything, or it could have been you be like the neighbors there in San Bernardino, and you're seeing something. And again, I get the sense that you're just not getting anybody's attention there in Georgia.
Well, I called the police again, told them again, and they said, well, ma'am, if you didn't call the day you saw the smoke. I said, well, I'm just kind of connecting dots. It may be nothing. I just want to tell you, well, ma'am, we can't just go invade their home. And I said, I'm just the messenger. I said, if you'll remember what happened in San Bernardino, it's not a far-fetched concern. At that point, she said, well, let me give you the Criminal Investigation Unit phone number and an extension of someone who specializes in this. That got her attention. Well, I called and basically recapped what I'm sharing with you, left my name and phone number, and I never heard back from them.
Yeah.
So
let me go on to William Kilpatrick, but I mean, again, Helen, you've done the right thing, I think. William Kilpatrick, what do you think? I mean, sometimes you might overreact, but in this environment, it would be better to be safe than sorry, don't you think?
Well, yeah, we're encouraged to, if we see something, say something, but once again, we're learning that maybe we better keep it to ourselves if we see something, because we'll get more trouble than we want.
Yeah. Man, we can't help you with that, and we'll send you on to somebody else, and of course that's the end of that, which kind of sets up your chapter on Western enablers of jihad. It does seem to me that if maybe this is too strong, but it does seem to me that political correctness could be our undoing. What do you think?
Well, yeah, one of the enablers is the very politically correct media, which has a habit of, see no Islam, hear no Islam, and speak no Islam, of underreporting the situation, of underreporting terrorist acts, of minimizing them. For example, in France, it was revealed last year that over 40,000 cars are burned each year by youth, Asian youth sometimes, but they never say that it's Muslim youth. Well, that's pretty strange that we hadn't heard about that. And in fact, the French people themselves didn't hear about it till very late in the game. If 40,000 cars a year were being burned by Christian youth, you would hear about that. In fact, you'd never hear the end of it. It will be on the news 24/7. So there's this underreporting of certain things that are going on. In the Philippines, for example, a couple of years ago, 60,000 Christians were forced to flee from Philippine City because of an invasion by Muslim terrorists. I'm sure most Americans haven't heard about that. If 60,000 Muslims were forced to flee from Christians, once again, you'd hear about that. So there's this double standard, there's this under-reporting, and there's a lot of selective reporting, a lot of details that are left out.
We have the Vice President, Joseph Biden, saying that maybe we would be better off if the press did less reporting of terrorism. That, I thought, was even more striking because I think many of these stories are underreported as it is right now. But if you seriously, the admonition from the Vice President.
Well, yeah, that's crazy. And this is exactly what the stealth jihadists want. They want to blind us to what's going on. They want to silence the media. They want to silence the press. They want to sort of cast this what the mafia calls omerta over everyone, the code of silence.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me get to one more, and that is, you not only talk about the Western enablers of jihad, but you have certainly spoken to what is happening in the Catholic Church, and you also use examples from the Lutheran Church, but you talk about Christian enablers of jihad. Can you explain that? Because that was something that was very new in the book that I think our listeners need to know about.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, many of the churches are playing along with this game, and they do it by minimizing the differences between Islam and Christianity and suggesting that, in fact, we have a great deal of common, and in fact, that we should have more solidarity with our Muslim brothers. And this is particularly the case in the Catholic Church, where Catholic bishops are actually dialoguing with one of the prime stealth jihadist groups in America, the Islamic Society of North America. And I'm sure the Catholic bishops are doing it with the best of intentions and in complete naivety. I hope it's naivety. In the Gospels, Jesus tells his disciples to be wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. And it seems to me that many churchmen have mastered the innocent as doves part, but when it comes to being wise as serpents, I'm afraid they're not.
What about this idea that Christians and Muslims worship the same God? We've had presidents say that. We've had certain pastors, even, as you said, some in the Catholic Church, some in the Protestant Church. What about this idea that Christians and Muslims worship the same God?
Well, I don't see how it can be the same God, because the Christians believe in a Trinity, and the Muslim God, Allah, denies vehemently that he is a Trinity over and over. Christians believe in the sonship of Jesus, and Allah denies that Jesus is the Son of God and curses those who say he is. So I think it's really a case of either or. Either you accept the version of Jesus and God that you get in the New Testament, or you accept the version in the Quran, because they're really incompatible with each other. And so I don't know where Christians get this idea that we worship the same God.
I would agree. Yeah, and I've addressed to that before, but let me take a break, and when we come back, you have some sections here on strategies for victory, and so let's, if we can, get into that. And if you'd like to join us before we move on to another topic in the second hour, again, we would encourage your phone call, 1-800-351-1212. Just joined us, we're talking with William Kilpatrick. The book is entitled The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad, and I might just mention that we have information about it on the website, although I'm sure you'll be able to find this book in your local bookstore. And just in case, you can order it there. And of course, we also have a link to his website, turningpointproject.com, the Catholic Response to Islamic Challenge. A lot of great material there as well. So again, all of it available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back. We'll take some more phone calls, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll talk about what the next commander-in-chief needs to do. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. When the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary began chapel recently, their speaker was not in the room. Instead, American astronaut Jeff Williams spoke from the International Space Station near the end of his 534-day mission. Williams told the students, "When I look out the window and I see this, all of the elements are what you would imagine you would see with a creative work by an infinite God." It reminded me of an interesting case from 1969. Madeleine Murray O'Hair, a notorious atheist, sued NASA because during a broadcast to Earth, the astronauts on Apollo 8 dared to read from the creation account in Genesis 1. O'Hair complained that the astronauts not only brought a Bible, but NASA permitted them to read from it while on a government-sanctioned mission using taxpayer-funded technology. The court dismissed O'Hair's complaint, noting that the Constitution makes room for such religious expression. And the court noted that NASA, as an employer, also has a duty to accommodate the religious beliefs of their astronauts, which the court called a perfectly legitimate task, especially when one considers the seriousness of the mission. More importantly, the court concluded that the religious speech belonged to the astronauts, not NASA, and as the court explained, to have prohibited the astronauts from making these statements would have been a violation of their own religious rights. You see, even in outer space, Americans have religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, if you'd like to join our conversation, we'll get to those calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. In your section on strategies for victory, you do point out something that is disturbing, and that is you have found that 2/3 of Muslims in the UK would not report someone with terrorist ties to the police. Now, I don't know if that percentage would apply here, but that means that when we depend on to see something, say something, we would hope that individuals that are not terrorists would report that. But at least what you find is even in the UK, a lot of Muslims who may be peace-loving, nevertheless, would not take it upon themselves to report that to the officials. That's disturbing for sure, isn't it?
Yes, and over here, groups like CARE, Council on American-Islamic Relations, actually encourage Muslims not to talk to the police, not to talk to the FBI. Yeah, and I think we make a mistake to assume that the vast majority of Muslims are moderate. Certainly the vast majority are not terrorists, but that doesn't mean they're moderate in the Western sense of the word. And the fact that 2/3 of Muslims in the UK wouldn't report a terrorist suggests there's something else going on. And so do these Pew polls of Muslim attitudes throughout the world, showing that something like 80% of Muslims in many countries are for things like Sharia punishments, cutting off hands of thieves, stoning adulterers, execution of apostates. Those are not moderate views. Those are pretty extreme views. And the very fact that we're so worried that the least offense to Islam is going to drive the moderates into the arms of the radicals suggests that it's not that long a drive. We don't worry that if that insults to Christianity or even to Jesus are going to drive moderate Christians into bomb-throwing radicals. And the reason we don't is we're talking about two very different kinds of religions.
Sure. Let's talk about that. I'll take one of these calls here. We have in Florida, I think this actually took place in North Dakota, but we'll go to Florida. Chris, I'd like you to share this story because it illustrates again how a Muslim in a situation could be offended, and we go out of our way to not offend them. But tell the story if you might.
Okay, I was in a Walmart in West Fargo, North Dakota. I had a variety of groceries, and I had a package of ham that was wrapped in plastic in a solid, hard plastic container. And I had heard this had happened before to someone else, but I was a little bit skeptical. And I got up to the register. The woman was obviously Muslim with her, she had a veil and her dress. She obviously was a Muslim woman. And she had to motion to her manager to come over and scan the item for her.
Because it was.
And then when I asked her, and when I asked where she was from, she looked a little kind of bothered by the question and said, "Well, why do you ask?" I said, "Well, I'm just curious, and I like to know where people are from." And she said, "Somalia," and I said, "Oh, okay. I'm originally from New Jersey," but really, I'm trying to make polite chit-chat, but it bothered me so much because as a Christian, I'm supposed to love and accept all people, and all I could think was, if I went to your country, first of all, I could not get a job as a woman, and definitely could not, after getting that job, have concessions made for me. I also had heard, too, and from someone who works in the distribution of food to the public school system in West Fargo, that they are not allowed to provide pork products. So then I thought of the pork producers in the area. So they are left out of the school, lunch program, which can be, a big source of their income. So anyway, I just have had this on my chest. It's been bothering me. I don't like to feel angry, but I was feeling definitely it bothered me a lot. I don't want the identity of our culture to change. We've gotten to the point that our politeness is going to be our own undoing.
Yes.
And also,
William, let me come to you because that's something you were talking about here as well. And again, if she was required by our manager to scan that, then we would be offended. CARE would get involved. There would be lawsuits. And so, again, if you are in a position where you believe you could not handle some of the food, the last place you should be would be a cashier or a person that works in the meat department. Or am I missing something here?
Oh, that's how stealth jihad works. It works off of political correctness. Suppose you are a manager of a store or a small business owner, and one of your employees demands to wear the hijab at work. What do? Or suppose a group of employees demands prayer breaks during the day, or even demands that you create a prayer space for them, a prayer room. What are you going to do? Are you going to stand up to it and resist and face being smeared as an Islamophobe and possibly face a lawsuit? That's happening a lot now. In fact, I believe that 40% of all religious-based workplace complaints now come from Muslims.
Wow. Again, when you can accommodate that, we talk about this all the time with Kelly Shackelford and others, when we can make a reasonable accommodation, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, whatever it might be, sure, we can make that accommodation. But when you use that to advance, like you said, a stealth jihad, that's a different kind of issue. And so just before we run out of time, one of the things I always like to do is point people to websites. And one of the ones that we have a link to is turningpointproject.com. Can you explain a little bit more about what's available there? Because obviously people are going to want to get a copy of your book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad. You'll probably find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link there so you can get it either in paperback or Kindle. But talk about what's available on your website just before we let you go.
Well, basically all my articles for the last 3 years are available there, and plus a little bit about my group, the Turning Point Project, my project, and what we're trying to do and what we hope to accomplish. And also you can order the book on the website as well.
Okay, so you might want to just order it there. If that would help them, we would encourage you to do so. So, William Kilpatrick, I followed your career, read your articles in First Things and Policy Review. Of course, we're familiar with your book, Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong, as well as Christianity, Islam, and Atheism, The Struggle for the Soul of the West. And this new book, which is going to be easy, I think, to find in your local bookstore. They have been very good over these many years of carrying many of the politically incorrect guides. This one's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. I know some more of you have some comments about that, and we will certainly do that. We're going to get into this idea of political correctness and what is even happening now in terms of political correctness on campus. Dr. Everett Piper will be with us for just a little bit. We're going to talk about this piece that I've posted as well called Tolerance and Tyranny, and how now the liberals, who always say we're open for a dialogue and a discussion, really say, no, you don't even have the right to those views. And so this is why we have these so-called safe spaces and trigger warnings, and certain ideas and thoughts simply are not allowed on campus and in society in general. So we'll spend some time getting into that topic as well. As you go to the website, if you'd like to know a little bit more about our two guests and all the other articles we've posted here, we certainly do encourage you to go to pointofview.net. Don't forget, we have the Pray, Organize, and Vote. Most of you have now found that you are now in states where if you're not registered to vote, it's too late, but some of you are in states where you could still register to vote, so you might want to take advantage of some of those resources. We, of course, have our one-stop election resources for Pray, Organize, and Vote. And I would encourage you as you go there to also consider clicking that button that says Donate. As I've pointed out before, it's about as predictable as anything else in the political season. Every 4 years, as we get close to election, everything stops. People don't invest in the stock market. People don't even do anything in the stock market because of the uncertainty. People don't give to ministries, and this is certainly one of those. We are really in need of your financial support. So if you could consider what you might do to give a special gift during the month of October. We know that oftentimes October and November are down times in giving, at least in an election year, and that is certainly the case. So if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate it. Click that button that says Donate. When we come back, we'll talk more about political correctness and the political campaign. We've got a lot more to cover, and we'll do that right after this.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening, one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about political correctness and intolerance, although oftentimes masquerading as tolerance. And we'll get back to the presidential campaign. Donald Trump says that the election is rigged, and I want to take that on for just a few minutes. I want to give you some of the latest polls on the presidential campaign, and also now some of the WikiLeaks dumps have helped us understand a little bit more about some of the concerns about Hillary Clinton's health and how many around her have been trying to guard some of that information. So we've got a lot to cover this hour, but first of all, we want to go to Dr. Everett Piper. He's been on the program with us before. He's president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, an individual with a PhD from Michigan State University, has written on all sorts of issues ranging from natural law to freedom and justice. And one that we're going to take on right now is kind of this postmodern political correctness, a piece that he had recently that came out in the Daily Caller. We've posted on our website under the title Tolerance and Tyranny. All has to do with some comments made by Sally Kohn and Dr. Piper. Welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you for having me on, Kerby. It's my pleasure.
We have certainly appreciated some of the things you have written about over the years. We have been remiss in not getting you on more often, but this was certainly a good occasion for that, because, you know, we hear so often that Christians are intolerant. And yet often it's the case, my argument is, that you find the people that are oftentimes the most intolerant are the people that refer to us as being intolerant. And a good example is this free speech symposium at the University of Missouri. No surprise there, because that's where a lot of the controversy is. But Sally Kohn, again, LGBT activist, liberal commentator, basically, if I can understand her, and I'll let you try to exegete her comments here for just a minute, basically said, we really don't have the right to speak out on those ideas. And if Christians are feeling themselves marginalized, good. That's where they belong. What are your thoughts?
Well, spot on. That's exactly what Ms. Kohn said. And for the listeners, they should know that she is a talking head for CNN. And she actually said at the symposium on free speech that those individuals that are arguing for free speech on the college campus today, that's code language probably in her mind for conservatives and or Christians that are arguing for free speech. She said, if they feel like they can no longer speak their views, good. And then she went on to say, I'm happy they feel under assault. This is a woman who supposedly is arguing for academic freedom, but yet she wants to shut your voice down and my voice down, or anyone else that disagrees with her, because we don't believe in diversity or inclusion. Well, how diverse is it of her to exclude you from the conversation? You know, Kerby, I've been arguing this for years. The worldview driving all of this, the postmodern worldview driving all, it's designed to conceal and deceive. Nothing is what it seems to be. Their call for inclusion is driven by exclusion. Their criticism of hate is fueled by their own hate. They wave the banner of feminism while denying the female. They claim to be pro-science while shamelessly ignoring basic biology. They revel in bigotry as they condemn the bigot. They kill the powerless, our youngest children, if you will, while they rail against the powerful. They denounce racism while fomenting racial division. I could go on and on. They wave banners of love. They know nothing of love, but everything of sex. Championing human rights, they mock what is human and what is right. It goes on and on and on. They've turned the world upside down. and they claim this, and I'll just say it and I'll take a breath here. This is what I have to deal with on a daily basis in the academy. They say things like this: I can't tolerate your intolerance. I hate those hateful people. I'm sure that nothing is sure, and I know that nothing can be known, and I'm absolutely confident there are no absolutes. It's self-refuting duplicity at every turn. It's like sawing off the branch upon which they sit. It's like watching a dog chase its tail. It would be funny and humorous if it weren't so sad.
And you say it is in the academy, because one of the things I did before I did this talk show, and I still occasionally do this, is speak on college campuses. And so, whether you've been to Texas A&M or Auburn, or whether you've been to Princeton or Michigan or San Jose State, or, all the different places I've been over the years, I find that, and it's gotten worse as time went on. When I first started doing it in the 1970s, you still sort of had this sort of liberal professor that would say, look, you've had a chance to hear my point of view, so I've invited Mr. Anderson in as part of the Christian Update Forum. You can hear his point of view. And sometimes I would even say to the students, well, your professor's paid you a high compliment. You can actually hear one talk that's a little bit different than his, and he still believes that you can sort out what is true and what is not. But political correctness said, no, you don't deserve that space. And that's really what you have right now, more articulately put forward by Sally Kohn, but certainly believed by so many other people on the faculty and administrations. And that is, we can't allow some of these views in there. And your argument is that one of the reasons they squash this dissent is otherwise we would point out all the contradictions you just mentioned.
I believe that's true. And in fact, if you really want to have a robust exchange of ideas, if you want to have a good argument, a good debate, then let truth judge it. It's not your power or mine. It's not our adversary's power. It shouldn't be about politics or power. It shouldn't be about the person. It should be about the truth. Jesus told us that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. C.S. Lewis told us that you can do no measuring without a measuring rod outside of those things being measured. And that measuring rod, that standard, if you will, is truth. And what you see on in the academy today, within so much of the secular establishment, and sadly, even within the Christian academy in many cases, is they are actually pursuing ideological fascism more so than academic freedom, because they want all the ideas to be approved, all the ideas to be comfortable, all the ideas to be part of that common bundle, if you will, that common bundle, that commonality. And if you ever step outside the context of those accepted ideas, those politically correct ideas, you'll be silenced. You'll be silenced because power is going to win rather than the principles of truth. And that's antithetical to the liberal arts institution. The liberal arts institution was established, if you want to go back to Oxford in 1100 AD, to liberate us, to educate a free man and a free woman, to liberate society, to give us liberty. Thus the word liberal. I'm more liberal classically than my left of center counterpart because I want to have a free, robust exchange of ideas with truth judging the debate.
Well, again, let's take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation with Dr. Everett Piper. And if you'd like to join us, we'll have him on for one more segment. They're going to move on to, of course, all sorts of issues in the news. Have, of course, a debate that is going to be taking place on Wednesday. We'll give you full coverage on that on Thursday. We have some of the comments by Donald Trump saying that the election is rigged. There are others that are saying no, but it really depends on what part you mean. Do you believe that there are people that are voting that should not? Well, I think we already have established that some people that actually are deceased. Nevertheless, those ballots seem to be showing up anyway. Do you believe that the media maybe has rigged some of this? Well, it seems to me like 10 women all of a sudden showed up all saying things about Donald Trump just 25 days before the election. Is that all coincidence, or was maybe some of that rigged? But if you believe that the election is rigged, well, that's a different issue. So we're going to get into some of those conversations about this and really come back and deal with this issue, because this is not intellectual freedom. As Dr. Everett Piper says, this is ideological fascism, and we need to understand what's happening not only in the college campus, but in the society. So we'll continue our conversation with him, and we'll take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
How bad is the economy? Many people believe it is still in bad shape. Others don't see a problem. They point to a low unemployment rate, record corporate profits, and a booming stock market. The difference in perspective is explained in a recent column on why this feels like a depression for most people. It begins with this simple observation. Everyone has seen the pictures of the unemployed waiting in soup lines during the Great Depression. When you try to tell a propaganda-believing, willfully ignorant, mainstream media-watching, math-challenged consumer that we're in the midst of a greater depression, they act as if you've lost your mind. During the Great Depression, there were as many as 12 million Americans unemployed. These were the men pictured in the soup lines. Today, they are essentially invisible. There are 46 million Americans in an electronic soup line. That 46 million are on food stamps and are hidden from our view. Let's look at it another way. There are 251 million Americans of working age and about 149 are employed. That means that only 59% of Americans of working age actually work. This is a much lower percentage than it was during the Great Depression. The author concludes that for the average American family, the U.S. economy has been in recession since 2000, with the Greater Depression arriving in 2008. Although the working age population has grown by 40 million since 2000, only 12 million jobs were added during that time. Most of these new jobs are in the government-controlled health, education, and social services sectors. Millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs disappeared during that same period. That is why it feels like a depression for so many people. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm not ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. In theaters October 21st.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for just a few more minutes, Dr. Everett Piper. And again, he is the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, which is unapologetic in their commitment to the truth of Christ, the truth of Scripture, and really modeling a way of thought, a way of life, and a way of faith. And we have a link to Oklahoma Wesleyan University on our website, okwu.edu. And again, it's on the website. And we also have posted his article that appeared in Daily Caller. And last Wednesday, you might have heard my commentary on the subject of intolerance, October 11th, in which I quote from him and his article. Dr. Piper, for just a few more minutes, let's talk about what the solution to that is. And I wish we could change everything, but let's, if we can, use your university. There are other Christian schools where there is an open and robust look at truth and interaction. And more recently, I even had a particular professor on this program talking about the fact that in these schools, which are Christian-oriented, many times when they go in for mock debates and do various kinds of projects with rhetoric, a lot of the Christian school students do better and actually achieve higher marks than even some of the Ivy League schools. And I think we're doing damage in these secular institutions when we only allow one point of view. They aren't even equipped enough to engage in a meaningful argument, hence why you get all these ad hominem attacks, because all they know what to do is accuse you of being intolerant, a homophobic, a bigot, Islamophobic, as we talked about in the first hour, but that's not really an argument, is it?
No, it's the ad hominem attack. It's calling names. You shoot the messenger rather than attend to the message, and that's exactly what's going on very often on the part of the left. But what's the solution? I think the solution is to return to the classic liberty.
Yes.
Freedom. is to want and embrace and love and hold dear those self-evident truths that God has endowed to us because they give us the maximum amount of human freedom that history has ever proven to be possible. G.K. Chesterton once said, when you get rid of the big laws of God, you don't get liberty, but rather thousands and thousands of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum. That's good stuff right there.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of big laws. Get rid of big laws. You don't get liberty. You get reams of federal documents. Thousands of little laws that rush in to control our life, and thus the human being loses freedom. The solution here is to recognize that we're made in the imago Dei. We're the image of God. We're not the imago dog. We're not animals. And therefore, we don't need to have thousands and thousands of little laws to corral us and to control us if we would simply learn to honor the 10 simple laws, if you will, and Jesus narrowed them down to 2. Those are the things that need to be taught in the academy that will result in a free society and a free people. Those are the things that classical liberalism, if you will, was grounded in, because those were the things that gave liberty. It's truth. Chesterton also said, if you want to have freedom, you've got to build a fence.
Right.
That you never have total freedom unless you learn to live within the boundaries that God has created for you. And thus, the solution is this: return to the truth of Christ and the truth of Scripture, honor it, and emphasize character, emphasize integrity, emphasize truth, and teach those things as the primary goal of the academy and of the university, rather than dumbing down everything to commonality and average.
And I think, again, you've written quite a bit for Breakpoint Magazine. One of the things we talk about here is not only helping individuals know how to articulate a biblical worldview, but let me come to the second point that we often talk about, and that is the need to defend a biblical worldview. Christianity does quite well in the interchange of ideas. Christianity in the first century really turned the world upside down because, in some respects, the Christians there outthought their culture and outloved their culture. In this upside-down world, what we need to do is train more individuals to know how to articulate a biblical point of view and know how to defend that biblical point of view, don't you think?
Absolutely. Be prepared to give a defense for the faith that lies within. I argue frequently that our church, with a capital C, has failed to catechize the next generation of believers. We don't know our own faith well enough, and a lot of the kids that you all are sending me at my university, they've had pizza parties and games at their youth group, in their youth groups, but they don't know how to defend their faith. Worldview Academy does a superior job in a one-week boot camp, if you will, for biblical worldview for teenagers. Summit Ministry does a superior job for seniors in high school and freshmen in college. Oklahoma Wesleyan stands boldly and unapologetic. We've got the Josh McDowell Institute for Christian Thought and Apologetics. We need to start recognizing, Kerby, that we've got to attend to the ideas that are being seeded in our culture for the next generation, because as Richard Weaver told us in 1948, ideas have consequences. And if we keep teaching lousy ideas, we're going to have lousy consequences within culture. We have to teach the big and the beautiful and the better ideas that are found in Scripture if we expect to be a free people.
Let's talk for just a minute before I let you go about what is available at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. We've talked about it before, but I would encourage people to recognize that you have a School of Business, a School of Arts and Sciences, a School of Ministry and Christian Thought, Education, Nursing, even adult and graduate programs, and you've talked about a little bit of what is there, but for individuals that are saying, I'm not sure I want to send my daughter or my granddaughter or my grandson or my son to the public university, I'd like to have someone actually infuse them with the truth of Scripture and really help them develop a way of thought, a way of life, and a way of faith. Talk about what's available there on your campus.
Well, like you said, we've got a School of Business, School of Nursing, School of Education, School of Humanities. All of these are exceptional. We're recognized by U.S. News and World Report and Forbes.com and whatnot as being one of the best institutions in the West. Those things are all good. But the one thing I would say to people is when you're choosing a college for your kids or your grandkids, I think you should ask 2 basic questions. Ask the president, what's your view of Scripture and what's your view of truth? And if the president says Scripture is inerrant, infallible, authoritative, it's the Word of God, that's a good answer. If he doesn't, it's not because he didn't understand you, he doesn't want to answer you. And what's your view of truth? Is truth the revelation of God? Is it an objective reality, or is it a postmodern subjective construct? Again, get the answer And the answer to those two questions will tell you whether or not you should spend the money to send your kid to that school. And why in the world would you want to spend 18 years of your children's lives and yours training them up in the way they should go so that when they're old they won't depart, only to send them off to an institution that in the first 18 minutes as you're driving away starts tearing down those things you've tried to instill in them? We need to take education seriously, and we need to return to the classic truths of Scripture as the context for good education.
And again, we talk so much about apologetics. Again, they have the Josh McDowell Institute for Apologetics, as well as so many other programs that are available there. So again, you can go to the website, which we have, which is okwu.edu, or just simply go to pointofview.net. We have a link certainly to Oklahoma Wesleyan University, but also a link to this most recent article that Dr. Piper wrote, and I would certainly commend it to you, and you might want to post it on your Facebook. Start a conversation. It will be a good conversation. It'll give you an opportunity to expose more people to some of the things we discussed here today. Dr. Everett Piper, always great to have you on the program. Let's do it again soon.
All right, bless you. Thank you.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take some of your phone calls, and if you would like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let's start off in Florida, WTJT. Phil, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for letting me voice my view. I've been a Southern Baptist minister for 50 years, and I've read several of Max Lucado's books, what great books they are. But you know, the gospel I preach teaches that we can be forgiven in a second. And I've heard Mr. Trump talk about his faith in the primaries that he was a Presbyterian. So I would just say to those who are not going to vote probably at all, since they can't vote for Hillary, they need to rethink their situation. God was able to forgive King David of adultery and murder. And so my question is, how long is it taking to forgive Donald Trump for his sins? And I heard in Dear Abby, I don't usually agree with a lot of things they say, but she was talking about a man that was going to make a statement by not voting. She said the only statement I see in that is they don't really care. So they don't care for our kids, you know, the mothers who may not vote. Think about the decision the Supreme Court and these federal judges are going to make that's going to affect people long after either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump is gone.
That's true. Phil, you've got some good points. I've come into a break, but I think, again, that will start a conversation for this last half hour. So if you'd like to join that conversation, its number is 1-800-351-1212. And if you have some thoughts about this election, we'd love to hear from you. Also have some thoughts about Donald Trump saying it's a rigged election. Let's get into that in a little more detail. Let's give you an update on what the polls tell us at the moment. Don't forget, though, the only poll that really matters is November 8th. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can. Or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other. And I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today. pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Open line this last half hour. Let's go to Robert in the state of Texas, KAVX. Robert, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I'm a big believer in the old adage, all that is needed for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing. That being said, all these evangelical Christians that are displeased with our candidate need to blame the 45% of evangelical Christians that stayed home during the primaries.
Yep.
There's plenty of Christian candidates running. If people had done their biblical and political duty, their duty to God and country, gotten out and voted in the primaries, we wouldn't have the two candidates we have today.
Good point. And I think when we have this sort of binary choice now, again, I think there's still a better choice in terms of policies and personnel. When you get into the person, each one of these P's is important. The person, their character, I don't think you got good character on either side. I think most people would probably agree with that. But when you work your way down to policies, which is another P, the platform, and then the personnel, the kind of people that they would put into office, I think there's a striking difference indeed. Let's give you a little bit of an update on where we stand at this point. I'm not real big on talking about the polls every day, but as we get a little closer, they may help us understand what is happening nationwide and in these key states. And these polls really are all over the map. But if you look at the national polls, it looks like Hillary Clinton is ahead. There was a poll yesterday that had her up by 11 points. But if you look at the Rasmussen poll, Hillary Clinton had by simply 2 points, 43 to 41. If you look at the battleground poll, up by 8. So, again, that's important. But as I have pointed out before, you're not elected by the popular vote. You're elected by the electoral vote. And what is happening in particular states is worth paying attention to. When you look at North Carolina, the CNN ORC poll, you have Hillary Clinton ahead by 1. And by the way, we certainly have our thoughts and prayers going out to those in the Republican headquarters there in North Carolina that was firebombed. We'll talk more about that maybe a little bit later in the program. When you go to Ohio, Donald Trump is far enough ahead that I believe Hillary Clinton has actually pulled her campaign out of that. He's ahead by 4 points, 48 to 44. When you go to Nevada, it looks like Hillary Clinton ahead by 2. Then you go into some of the other polls that have just come out over the last couple of days. Louisiana, Donald Trump ahead by 7. Utah, Donald Trump ahead by 1. So, again, very important to pay attention to some of these polls, but also to recognize when you look at these polls that there are just a lot of things that are missing. Point number 1, you have some individuals that may tell the pollster that I'm voting, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm voting for this candidate. In other words, I do know that there are some people who said I'm going to vote, but I'm going to skip the presidential race, and I'm going to vote for the governor's race, the state representative race, whatever. So that's a first issue. Number 2 is something we've talked about before, the so-called Bradley effect. Tom Bradley, when he ran 1982, looked like he was going to win according to the polls, but that's because they didn't want to tell the pollster that they were not going to vote for the African American. This time, I think there's some people that just can't bring themselves to tell a pollster that I'm not going to vote for the first woman as president, or maybe I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump because look what happened in North Carolina, and some of the arguments that are being made right now about the rhetoric of Donald Trump is the reason we had the bombing of that Republican headquarters. So all sorts of issues there. But just before I take another phone call, if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. What about Donald Trump's comments about this being a rigged election? David Jackson and Susan Page, writing for USA Today, say Donald Trump's repeated charges that the race for the White House is being rigged against him is unprecedented, historians say. They warn that it could undercut the ability of the next president to govern or even spark violence on Election Day and afterwards. Never in modern times has a modern major party nominee hurled accusations with no credible evidence that the election results themselves could not be trusted, a development that would raise questions about the legitimacy of the winter. Okay, anybody remember Michael Moore and all the other people that said that George W. Bush was an illegitimate candidate, an illegitimate president? I mean, of course, they go on and mention that, sure, in 1960, there was some voter irregularities. As a matter of fact, if you were to actually have challenged the votes in Illinois and West Virginia, possibly Richard Nixon could have won, but he simply conceded and ended that. And then they used the example of 2000. Al Gore accepted the results. Yeah, really? Certainly his supporters disputed it. But, okay, it's a reasonable point. And the editors of National Review said that Donald Trump is playing the sore loser and hasn't even lost yet. The presidential contest, he said on tweeted Saturday, is an election being rigged by the media in a coordinated effort with the Clinton campaign. Okay, let's just face the fact that there probably is a little bit of truth to that, and it depends on what you mean by rigging the campaign. If by this you mean that all of these elections are rigged and there is going to be widespread voter irregularities, maybe not. Is there evidence of voter fraud? Yes, and more states. I've documented this in a couple of commentaries. We could probably put together a list, if you'd like to see it, of all the investigations that are taking place in places as widely divergent as Virginia and Wisconsin. Now there's been some investigation of even in the state of Texas. You have dead people that were voting in Colorado, all sorts of things that have happened. Would that be enough to affect the election? Let's hope not. Is it possible that someone could hack into this? Well, again, we've sort of tried to address that issue. But the point is that if you say rigged in the sense that there is widespread voter irregularity and the election is going to be stolen from Donald Trump, I don't know. That's a tough one to argue. But are there examples of voter fraud? Yes, there are. And I'm really weary of so many individuals saying that election fraud is a myth and it's simply being used to prevent people from voting in the elections. No, we have a lot of these voter ID laws, some of them passed by African-American legislators and in legislatures where you have a very high percentage of African-Americans because they want to make sure that their vote counts. Is there a possibility that the media has been working with the Hillary Clinton campaign? Yes, we got some WikiLeaks that seem to suggest indeed that was taking place in the primary. It seems to be some evidence that it's happening here as well. Does that mean that all of this bias is against Donald Trump? No, not necessarily, but it's certainly something that is deserving of some attention and some conversation. So, again, let's be very fair in terms of recognizing that if you properly define what you mean by a rigged election, there may be some truth to it, but just this carte blanche, broad brush statement that the election is rigged without any evidence is not helping the Trump campaign. And again, is one of the many sideshows. There are so many of these sideshows right now that are taking us away from what is really important, and that is which policies, which judges, which administration is going to actually have an influence in the future. And so that's why I think it is absolutely crucial to keep our eye on the ball. But let's take some more phone calls, give some of you a chance to join the conversation. So we'll go, in this case, to Missouri, KNEO. Kay, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, I had called because I had got a newsletter I get from Derek Prince, his ministry, and they had a copy of his prayer in October of 1980 before the election, and he gives, quote, "Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues." That was out of Psalm 55:9, and then he gives a prayer, and it says, "We lift up to you this nation of ours, the United States, and we thank you for the many centuries of special grace and mercy that you've granted to this nation. We thank you for godly seeds that have been sown over the centuries by men of faith who have followed in your footsteps, labored, sacrificed, prayed, and given for your kingdom. Lord, we do not desire that these godly seeds shall develop into a harvest that shall be reaped by the enemy. But we ask you to extend your grace and mercy to this nation. We ask you to send a mighty visitation of the Holy Spirit that will overthrow the strongholds of Satan and uplift the glory in the name of the Lord Jesus." And he goes on and he says, "We pray that you will guide and overrule, and that you will raise up the men and women of your choice, and that you will put down those who will oppose and stand against your purposes. We ask you to bring your purposes to fulfillment in this nation." That long ago, at a time I remember when he was running all the things people said against Ronald Reagan, I didn't even know that this prayer existed, but I can see that there were prayer going up at that time for a change in America.
Sure. You know, and we've had James Robinson talking about his prayer and some of the things he did to introduce Ronald Reagan, but let's bring it up to the current situation. If you haven't seen it, you certainly could go out on Facebook and type in the name Mike Pence, who's the vice presidential nominee under Donald Trump, and he has a very eloquent video, which I've put on my Facebook, maybe we could put on the Point of View Facebook as well, of calling the nation to pray for this election. And so certainly, as we have talked about so often in our Pray, Organize, and Vote, you should certainly be in prayer about this election. It is perhaps the most important one this nation has faced in some time. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. When the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary began chapel recently, their speaker was not in the room. Instead, American astronaut Jeff Williams spoke from the International Space Station near the end of his 534-day mission. Williams told the students, "When I look out the window and I see this, all of the elements are what you would imagine you would see with a creative work by an infinite God." It reminded me of an interesting case from 1969. Madeleine Murray O'Hair, a notorious atheist, sued NASA because during a broadcast to Earth, the astronauts on Apollo 8 dared to read from the creation account in Genesis 1. O'Hair complained that the astronauts not only brought a Bible, but NASA permitted them to read from it while on a government-sanctioned mission using taxpayer-funded technology. The court dismissed O'Hair's complaint, noting that the Constitution makes room for such religious expression. And the court noted that NASA, as an employer, also has a duty to accommodate the religious beliefs of their astronauts, which the court called a perfectly legitimate task, especially when one considers the seriousness of the mission. More importantly, the court concluded that the religious speech belonged to the astronauts, not NASA, and as the court explained, to have prohibited the astronauts from making these statements would have been a violation of their own religious rights. You see, even in outer space, Americans have religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention, tomorrow we'll have Johnny Erickson Tata with us in the first half hour, Jay Sekulow in the last half hour, but we'll still have lots of time to talk about what's happening in the presidential campaigns, and we'll get into that story as well. Let's take a few more phone calls before we run out of time. We'll go to Kentucky next. Darren, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, sir, for having me.
Sure.
I'm just an old country deplorable from Kentucky, and you were talking about the election being rigged. Well, my question is, how are you possibly able to even run for president while being investigated by the FBI?
Oh, good question. And again, in any other circumstance, an indictment would have been given to Hillary Clinton. I don't think anybody that looks at those facts. I mean, I know there's some supporters that say she did not deserve to be indicted. And again, if you can put your head around all the things that the FBI Director James Comey listed, any other circumstance, a person with all those issues and all those misrepresentations and all of those areas in which she was not truthful, to put it mildly, would have led to an indictment. But I think what you had on the case of the FBI Director James Comey is a realization that even if he recommended indictment, she wouldn't be indicted, and he was not going to be the one to actually dismiss a presidential candidate. He'd let the American people decide. So just as Justice John Roberts knew in his heart of heart that he should have declared Obamacare unconstitutional, but just did not want to be labeled as the person that killed the signature piece of legislation for Barack Obama, so also I think James Comey, FBI Director, did not want to be the one that put a cloud over Hillary Clinton and prevented her from being elected as the first woman to the presidency. So this is the upside down world that we live in. And again, any other circumstances, any other person in that circumstance would be indicted and probably would be convicted as well.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you bringing that up. Let's, if we can, see if we can just take a few more phone calls here. We'll head out to North Carolina, WKGV. DJ, thank you for calling today.
Hi, Kirby. First-time caller, long-time listener. You made a statement just a few minutes ago that the popular vote doesn't elect the president, that the electoral vote does. And I've seen videos online where people say the same thing. My question is, why do we vote then?
Okay. And first of all, we have to recognize that when we're voting, we're really voting within our state. There's no national election. We call it a national election because it has national implications. But, for example, DJ, when you go and get your ballot and you look at the information, you're going to see that all of those ballots and all of that information came from ultimately Raleigh, North Carolina, which is the capital of your state. Now, it might also have some other things that were run and some regulations that were governed by the county in which you are, wherever that might be. And so these are actually 50 state elections plus a 51st election that happens in the District of Columbia. And what you are doing is you are electing electors that will then go to your state capital, which is Raleigh, and cast their vote in December. Now, again, I want to recognize that this is what's written in the Constitution, but there have been some changes. Ever since 2000, in which Al Gore won the popular vote, but George W. Bush won the electoral vote and became president, more and more states, I'll just pick one as an example, let's say in New Jersey, have now written into their constitution that if indeed the people in that state voted for differently than who won the popular vote, the electors would be those who would vote for the popular vote. So we are, in a sense, in the midst of transition because more and more states are simply saying that their electors will then go along with the popular vote rather than how they voted within the state. And so this is why you're going to have something that's going to be really confused in this election and maybe in the next couple of elections. But the reason we have an electoral college was because the framers understood that this would then force a candidate to actually go to all the states. If all you needed to do is get the popular vote, back then you'd go to New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, and you would ignore the rest of the Eastern Seaboard. Even to this day, you would just simply go to, well, I'll go to New York, I'll go to Los Angeles, I'll go to Chicago, might go to a few other places, but I won't even care what happens in some of the smaller states like North Carolina, Iowa, Nevada. This is why these states like Nevada and Iowa and New Mexico and Colorado are so important, because in many cases those are the swing states. But anyway, I probably gave you more history lesson that you wanted to know, but the reality is really what we have are 51 individual state elections, 50 state elections and a District of Columbia election, and it really isn't even a national election because the elections that we are actually participating in are actually controlled by the state and the local people.
Okay, so what you're saying is the Electoral College has to vote the way the popular vote? votes or not?
Some of the states are, so I probably confused you by that. But
Yeah,
let's just say that North Carolina right now looks like it's going to vote for Hillary Clinton. If that's the case, then it means that all of the electors will go to Raleigh and vote for Hillary Clinton. If that's the case. But in a few cases, you could have a situation in a few states where even though the electors voted for Hillary Clinton, let's say Donald Trump won, in some of those states, they would then, in a sense, violate the spirit of what's in the Constitution and vote for Donald Trump. But we'll see how that plays out. It hasn't been a big issue until now, but I'm just kind of reporting to you that we're really sort of transitioning. And if indeed that does take case, we may eventually no longer have an electoral college that means anything, because indeed we'll be electing the president by the popular vote. And of course, only one time in the century have we had a situation in which the popular vote candidate did not win. That was Al Gore, and the electoral vote candidate won instead, and that was George W. Bush.
Okay. Thank you, Kerby.
Thank you. Hope I didn't confuse everybody with that. But again, it's just one of those things that was established by the framers. I think it was really a good idea because, after all, it has forced the candidates to go to states that they never would go to before. And those of you who are listeners in places like Iowa and New Mexico and certainly Virginia up until recently, Pennsylvania, all sorts of other places that have in the past probably easily been ignored because those are key swing states, we've seen the candidates show up there. And so again, my apologies to those of you who are listeners in Florida or Ohio or Virginia or Colorado, New Mexico. You probably have been pummeled with presidential ads like no one's business, and you probably can't even imagine what it will be like when November 8th comes and goes. You'll finally get your airwaves back again. So I know almost all of us are weary of this campaign, but it's still taking place. We have a very important third and final presidential debate on Wednesday, so we'll be talking about that on Thursday. We didn't get to some of the information today about Hillary Clinton's health. A very important article by Ed Klein, who's been on the program here. Some of the WikiLeaks, we now know a little bit more. And as we suspected, even though her doctor said she's as fit as a fiddle, turns out maybe not the case. And so that is something that people will probably not know much about till after the election, but we're going to try to give you a perspective on that as well. Don't forget that we have Johnny Erickson Tata with us tomorrow on the first half of the program, first half hour, and then we have Jay Sekulow in the last half, and in between we're going to get into a couple more of these important issues. If you would like to know more about the book that we talked about in the first hour, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Jihad by William Kilpatrick, it's available on the website. The piece written by Dr. Everett Piper there as well. And as I've mentioned before, we do need your financial support. Oftentimes as we come to an election, because of the great uncertainty, people don't invest, people don't give. We hope that you will consider this as a lifeline so that we can give you the news and information you need to hear. And so if you could visit the website, pointofview.net, click on the button that says donate, and we would greatly appreciate it. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Look forward to our time tomorrow with Johnny Erickson Tata and Jay Sekulow. We'll see you then.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5787. 5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.